Dr. Smith, welcome to Can Learn Conversation. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for this invitation.
We're here to talk about Howard Thurman. We're here to talk about a particular quote, but I just want to start with just asking you, what is your earliest memory having an encounter with Thurman's work?
Oh, that's very easy for me. I was coordinating a program at Eden Theological Seminary, and what came forth was this invitation to the National Committee of Black Churchmen held in New York. I had heard about Thurman, but not a lot. And my board at the time, when I reported to them that I had this invitation and that Howard Thurman was going to be a keynote speaker, they all lit up and they said, "You have to go, you have to go." And so I was very excited about this opportunity to hear someone who had had such an impact upon this clergy board of mine, and went there with great anticipation. And it was there in New York with his keynote address that I first heard Howard Thurman, and it all started from there. He was not for me, "Oh, here's a subject of scholarship." That was not the case. I was not even at that point in time in a doctoral program. But what he said and how he said it made such an impression upon me that, a year later, I wrote him and asked if I could visit with him, and our relationship started there as a friendship before I thought of him as a subject of scholarship.
Mm. I want to dive a little deeper into the how he said it.
Mm,
So, what about that moment? Like, take us back to that moment. You can tell us what he was talking about, but
mm.
also, what is the how that you're referencing and why did you gravitate towards it?
Thurman began with a prayer that was quoting the 139th Psalm, his favorite um, psalm. Thurman would say if there was only one uh, chapter in the Bible that survived, for him, it would be the 139th Psalm. But the way in which he spoke the 139th Psalm as a prayer, um, you knew that he was not just reciting the 139th Psalm, he was in it, and it was in him. So much so that I did not even recognize it as the 139th Psalm, but it set the tone as leading us to a place in time to talk about these matters of God's presence with us, the attention to be given to what's happening internally and externally. Um, and from there, he went on to very much affirm what this conference was about in terms of the Black church and its role. I had heard other speakers very much condemning the way in which so much theology in the larger society was avoiding the issues of justice and the need to attend to matters of uh, the Black experience in this country. And Thurman's address spoke to that, but he also challenged the Black church to not ignore the kind of internal dynamics that individuals bring to the church. Um, and this was different than anything else I had heard. And it resonated with me. It was right. And it related to my own upbringing, even though I had not heard very much of anything about this in any kind of formal theological presentation, but Thurman did it. Um, and the way in which he did it, there's one way in which I've thought about this experience over the years is um, Thurman was open-hearted. And I had the feeling, here's someone who's not just speaking about concepts and ideas. Yes, that. But the way in which he was speaking about them, you knew that these were matters of his heart. And anytime someone opens their heart to you, you need to take off your shoes because this is holy ground. And that's the experience I had in this conference, an experience an experience of being on holy ground, with someone who offered himself fully and who spoke to, yes, our hearts, but also who spoke to my heart in terms of what was for us, what was for me in the journey ahead.
Mm. Thank you. I felt like I was back with you as you were sharing. I want to dive into the heart just a bit.
Mm.
So there's a quote from Howard Thurman that I want to read and then just get your reflections on what you feel like Thurman is telling us today. In the stillness of quiet, if we listen, we can hear the whisper of the heart giving strength to weakness, courage to fear, and hope to despair. So, as you were talking about those internal dynamics, I think this quote truly does reference it. So, what is Thurman trying to convey to us here for you?
Um, I believe Thurman is continually speaking about the wisdom that resides within us. And it's not just wisdom about life matters, it is that, but the wisdom that is really attending to um, who we are to become and what is uh, most uh, significant for our own formation and our own sense of identity. Um, Thurman spent a lot of time with the Quakers, and one of the phrases that the Quakers use, I think, for this is the inner teacher. And Thurman's really encouraging us to pay attention because to ignore this inner teacher is to ignore a source that is for us, that is to guide us, that we can rely on when others perhaps have stepped away from us. Uh, at times when we feel alone, but at times when we also feel terribly confused about the many messages that are being brought to us. And Thurman is saying, pay attention to what the internal teacher is saying. Um, it's very interesting in that I was reading a book where it's a book entitled "The Body Keeps the Score," and the author is quoting someone else's research who basically says that there is within every person that area that is working for a holistic you. And it knows the traumas you have had, but it is not overwhelmed by the traumas you have had. And it's working for your own sense of formation, for wholeness, in ways that you can rely upon. This inner self. It's not something that is only disclosed through neuroscience. It's an old understanding of the mystics, certainly, even people who do not necessarily identify themselves as mystics, that we have available to us that which is God given in the very creative process as to who we are. How do we listen to it? How do we nurture it? Um, and how do we respond to it? This, I think, is a gift that is often lost when we have either a religious perspective or a very personal perspective that assumes that our only insights are likely to be coming from external sources.
When you're thinking about the internal teacher, I'm thinking about all of the ways, to your point, that we receive these external messages that can sometimes jade our perspective. So, what do you think, just thinking about modern society, what is the most dangerous thing to our internal teacher?
Mm, I think the most dangerous thing to the internal teacher is to be ignored. Um, and to be clear, Thurman is not suggesting that we somehow or another exclude the external messages or even to diminish them, um, because he receives meaning from s- the sources of the environment, some of which are the persons, but some of which are from nature itself. And as he speaks about what it meant for him as a child to bring his self, his hurt self, his questions, his issues to the oak tree in his yard, and how that was a time of just healing for him. He's really insisting that we pay attention to the kinds of sources that are for us and which really can provide the sort of 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 healing and knowing that all of us, I think, aspire to experience. So there is that affirmation, um, but to know that it's there, that we are born with it, um, and to ignore it is to our own demise, I think is an important message that he gives to us. But the other message that Thurman has is to pay attention to the practices, or as Thurman himself would say, the disciplines that enable us to listen with greater wisdom and understanding than we would have if we were somehow or another failing to have the practices. And in his book, Disciplines of the Spirit, he lists 5 practices that I think are vital to this way of knowing, where he talks about commitment, prayer, suffering, reconciliation. These are ways by which we come to understand what the inner teacher is offering us in light of our experiences of prayer and suffering and commitment and reconciliation. But without the practices, you are likely less capable of understanding this wisdom that is within you, as well as the wisdom that is coming externally to you.
I want us to talk a little bit about suffering. You
Mm.
just referenced that Thurman talked about suffering often. It was a part of the disciplines.
Mhm.
So, when you're thinking in that part of the quote where it says despair to hope, what does that look like?
It's a process that is very much related to the individual. And for some people, it may be a quick process in light of things happening externally or internally. For other people, it may take a long time. For some people, it may be a supportive community. For other people, it may be counseling. For some people, it may be simply the exhaustion they experience with despair, and they want to move on, and they have persons who can be companions with them in this process of moving forward. Um, the I think uh, the real issue in this process is to take seriously what are the elements that are informing the despair. How do you attend to that which has truly led you to feel, in some sense, lost to yourself, or alienated from others, or so traumatized you wonder if tomorrow is worth waiting for? Um, these kinds of realities for people can be at levels of from something like a lost friendship to something like a Holocaust experience. So that it's a wide range that still qualifies within this sense of how people arrive at a place of despair. But always present for us is the capacity, the practices, the opportunities to experience hopefulness. That God does not abandon us because of despair. Whether it is mild despair or fierce despair, we are not abandoned. And it's this presence of God, it's this love of God that one can rely upon in whatever the journey is, be it brief or be it extended over a period of time. What's crucial is to give oneself to the healing process and to not feel so forsaken that somehow one feels bereft of any kind of caring or helping hand. That's essential in this. And so Thurman is always emphasizing the very not just presence, but loving presence of God that is a source of healing for us, that is for us, and is also for this larger vision of who God intends this creation to be for us, or what God intends this creation to be for us.
Mhm. Thank you so much for naming that healing does not have a time frame.
Yes,
But something that you said, I was thinking about another interview where you were talking about Howard Thurman, and you were saying that while he may have lived a life of contemplation, what he was always sure about is the love of God
yes,
and the presence of God.
yes. And it's important, I think, to understand that Thurman, having lived a life of contemplation, was not avoiding um, the kinds of struggles and traumas that occur when you're running up against forces of life that are in some way assaulting the spirit. He's living through times of segregation where even when he's being invited to speak somewhere, there is this matter of where will they house him? Where can he eat? And early on, Thurman comes to this decision that he's not going to uh, accept that any kind of segregated quarters. He will not accept an invitation if he's clear about that, and neither will he accommodate himself to that if others have made an arrangement that somehow or another is affirming the system of injustice.
Mhm.
Um, but having to deal with that reality is the kind of assault on the spirit. It's a calling into question as to who you are in this larger environment, in who you are in a nation of in which you are a citizen, and the way in which your value is perceived to be so less than other citizens that you are therefore consigned to places that these other citizens can go. I think it's one of those matters that led Thurman to write Jesus and the Disinherited, identifying himself as one of the disinherited, and the way in which the Christian message must be attentive to recognizing the struggles, the trauma, the injustice, and the sin of segregation, discrimination, hate, and all that gets fostered from that.
Mhm. What I'm hearing in what you're saying is that just community is important. And you were talking about Thurman in an interview, and you were saying that Thurman is not just important or was not just important to the community at that time, but he's saying something to generations. So, what, as we close, because I know we don't have a lot of time left, what do you think Thurman is saying to us now, to the community, that we should be paying attention to?
There are several levels at which I think Thurman offers guidance for where we find ourselves. There is this eternal matter of the importance of the inner life. Uh, and that has been an issue for all the ages. um, but a distinctive contribution of Thurman at this particular time, I believe, relates to this question of pluralism. And how do we understand community that is characterized by so many diverse identities, be they around matters of ethnicity or sexual orientation or gender identity or race or national heritage or language. We could go on and on. And clearly, our society struggles with that now to an extent that has the possibility of disrupting community to the point of breakdown, to the point at which we have lost the sense of center for community. And I think Thurman is offering us a way by which to be moving forward with an understanding of this type of diversity, where we are not understanding community as the elimination of these distinctions, but the affirmation of the particulars as a way to also affirm community itself.
Mm.
That requires a lot of work on our part because I think there is something also within us that is so at home with our own particularity that we can so easily find other particularities to be threatening. I know William May in his book, A Catalog of Sins, he said in some languages, the word for stranger is the same word that is used for enemy. And when this begins to, I think, characterize a whole society, when we haven't had in our churches or in our community institutions help in discerning how we receive others, how we introduce ourselves to others, how we live together, how we not just live together in terms of not being violent with one another, but how do we appreciate one another and respect one another at a level in which we seek to engage one another in a heart to heart way. This getting back to the heart where we began. How do I offer my heart to others, and how do I receive another's heart? And doing that with any kind of integrity may have a long runway. But the question is, are we on the runway? Or have we been so intimidated by the idea, or we just feel so incapacitated that we fail to take seriously this is our task? This is what it means to be a, com- um, a member of the community for the community. This is what it means to be a member of the community for myself. And I think Thurman has provided us not a blueprint because I basically distrust blueprints, but what but what he has provided us is a vision. And some of the basic principles for enacting that vision of community. Uh, if it's if we accept that, I think we have a much better opportunity to experience the kind of community that God has dreamed us to be for one another.
With this podcast, we really like to be practical and leave people
Mm,
with something that they can go and do for themselves.
mm.
So, what would be your three tips for someone who's listening and from everything you've said, they want to engage with Thurman's work? They possibly even want to do that in silence. What would be your three tips for someone encountering Thurman's work? How to get the most out of it?
Well, I think it's important to read Thurman himself. Um, his, I think, most read and influential book is Jesus and the Disinherited. Um, and that's a that's the one I always recommend as a starting point. I think it can be also helpful to read his autobiography because then you get the larger context for Thurman in terms of how he arrives at the kinds of insights he has to us in terms of religion, especially his own struggles that go back to childhood. Um, so if you're really interested in gleaning what Thurman has to offer, those are two books I would recommend. But it's the practices that also, I think, enable us to hear Thurman in a way in which we're not just, again, attending to the concepts, but we're preparing our own spirits, our own hearts to receive the wisdom of Thurman, the conviction of Thurman, um, and and the way in which Thurman can tarry with you as a companion of the journey. That I think takes it to a another level because what Thurman is saying to us is not simply about having intellectual consent from us. It's about how we are going to live. So when he's talking about community, for example, and he holds up Fellowship Church as a prime example of his own work and commitment in terms of community, he speaks about the necessity for people to be together over an extended period of time where they're able to truly work at the meaning of community with one another in ways that they will not get if they're only going to make this a brief encounter or they're only testing this for a short period. You have to be able to continue to relate through not just struggle but conflict and the emotions of anger and perhaps even the emotion of hate that arises, to be able to work through that and to remain committed to community and to be looking at ways in which to be working at the process of reconciliation, to understand the different meanings of reconciliation, because it doesn't always relate to somebody who you um, disliked now becoming your friend. But how do we take the dynamics of community seriously enough that we're able to give ourselves to the practices of community so that those who are speaking to us, like Howard Thurman or Thomas Merton or Henry Nouwen, um, or Rufus Jones, uh, we have some fertile ground upon which their seeds are planted within us.
Mhm. Dr. Smith, thank you for taking us on a journey today. You started by telling us about your first time hearing
Mm,
Thurman. And I'm remembering when you said that you were on holy ground because you felt like you could hear his heart.
mm,
And I
yes,
pray that each of us have a moment like that, either with encountering one of his readings, encountering his autobiography, and really finding time with our inner teacher.
yes.
Thank you for reminding us of all of these things today. I appreciate your scholarship. I thank you for saying yes to coming today. And I know people will be blessed by our conversation. Thank you so
Again,
much.
thank you for my being here and the offerings you provide us through this format and the many speakers that you've had involved. Thank you. I'm glad to be among them.